The New Zealand Business Podcast, brought to you by Gorilla Technology, your strategic and proactive IT partner.
Greetings and welcome to the show. I'm your host, Paul Spain, futurist and chief executive at Gorilla Technology. I love to see individuals and their organizations thrive. The New Zealand Business Podcast is all about this through sharing the business, leadership, and innovation learnings of our most successful people. In this episode, I'm talking with Janine Grainger, a trailblazing entrepreneur best known as the co-founder of Easy Crypto, a company that has transformed the way New Zealanders engage with digital currencies. Janine was introduced to the world of cryptocurrency back in 2014, guided by her background in economics and finance, went on to build New Zealand's most successful crypto exchange, which was acquired by Australian company SwiftX in 2025. In this episode, Janine shares about her startup experiences, including all of the usual challenges along with navigating regulations, coming up against banking roadblocks, and dramatic swings in the market along the way. The New Zealand Business Podcast is brought to you by 1NZ and Gorilla Technology. Janine Grainger, great to have you on the New Zealand Business Podcast. How are you doing?
Thanks for having me on, Paul. Great to be here.
Always good to catch up. Really exciting to be able to have this chat. Where you've reached a point with the Easy Crypto journey. You've built it and sold it and exited. So really looking forward to delving into your story. As you know, I kind of like to start fairly early on. So tell us a little bit about where you were born and where you grew up.
Well, I'm Auckland born and bred, so solid Jaffa here, and I grew up in sort of out south central Auckland. Actually, high school dropout, which not that many people know, but as a founder, I think that's a relatively common storyline. School, I was good at school, but I didn't enjoy it, and I think just having to maybe focus on what other people thought was important rather than what I thought was important was perhaps just going a little bit against the grain. I went to my parents one day and said to them, hey, can I drop out of school? And they said, you can't leave school unless you've got a job. And then apparently the next day I came home with a job at a cafe, which my mother was like, wasn't quite expecting that to happen so quickly. And maybe we're thinking a little bit more of a long-term career choice than waitressing, but, fair play. So they agreed to me dropping out of school and I started working at, I think I would have been 15 then, moved out of home shortly after, quite an independent streak early on.
Wow. And leading up to that time as a youngster, were there any sort of entrepreneurial things that you did, or did your very first things come a little bit further down the track?
I think I always had an entrepreneurial streak as a kid. I was doing all sorts of, I used to breed rabbits and sell them back to the pet shop. At one stage, I had a little garage sale business going where I'd go around to people's homes and help them declutter, then sell their stuff in a garage sale at their house and take 30% of the profits for having sold their stuff for them.
That's a good business.
Yeah, it was, right? And I think there are a few other sort of schemes like that. I never really stuck at anything for too long, which was one of my failings growing up, was sort of the flitting from one idea to the next rather than sticking with one. But definitely the entrepreneurial streak was there from early on.
Yeah, interesting. What did those initial years of working, look like? I picked up that you progressed on from the waitressing. Yeah. You kind of mixed it up a fair bit, right? Over a period of years.
Yeah, I had a very unplanned career. One thing would sort of lead to another and doors would open or I'd find opportunities that I was interested in. So I ended up doing, I went over to the UK and sort of lived there for a while. I ended up doing accounting for a couple of travel agencies. And while I was doing that, I decided to go back to university, go back to study, I guess. Went to university as an adult student, which meant I had to sit in the front row and, put my hand up all the time. And I was juggling that with full-time working, full-time study, just sort of juggling both those things and end up doing a commerce degree, which, I think was really helpful. I did economics, which is a great way of looking at the world, finance, which sort of helps you learn about numbers. But I think also just the the rigor of going back to university and of like, having to knuckle down and learn something and apply myself was probably quite helpful, but not necessarily something I could have done at an earlier age.
Yeah, and you were doing that alongside working as well, so that would have been quite a lot on your plate.
Yeah, and I guess that also, probably was helpful for startup life in that, you're always having to juggle so many things, so many commitments and responsibilities, and manage time well, which is, a great discipline to learn.
Mm. And you talked about doing accounting work. How did you get into doing that? Yeah, had you done any study at that point?
That was a little bit of an accident in that I'd started as a receptionist at a travel agency, and then through a series of unfortunate events, the accountant had to leave at very, very short notice. And so I stepped into the accounting role because I'd been doing admin and help. And so, I'd learned a lot of what they were doing, and I sort of stepped in to backfill when they left. And then from that, I ended up, this travel agency was bringing in a new computer system, and I was the youngest by probably a generation or two. And so I was helping train up the staff on this new computer system. Then I started training up the staff in other agencies of the same franchise. Then I started taking on accounting roles for these other agencies. So I sort of, just lent into areas where my skills could be useful or where I felt was interested.
Wow, that's really interesting the way that happened. What do you think were the lessons that you learnt in those earlier years that have helped you and stayed with you through your journey?
Great question. I think one of the important lessons that I've learned, it was through that job where I sort of took on this new computer system and accounting role, which I was not familiar with, but also other roles. Like, for example, I worked with Auckland Tourism Events and Economic Development, which is now Auckland Unlimited, I think, hosted Auckland Startup Week. I worked with them a few years ago, and one of the jobs that I did was helping to bring Cricket World Cup to New Zealand. And I knew very little about cricket and even less about, how to grow cricket pitches, how fast, how often they needed replacing, what infrastructure you needed for hosting a World Cup, how much all these things would cost. And that event and other things like World Masters Games, etc., which we also pitched for, really taught me that you can become an expert in anything if the subject matter is small enough and if you dedicate some time to it. So, if you're, and this is one of my messages for startups that I work with, is, don't be afraid of areas you don't know about and just be like, oh, I'm not an expert there, I'll have to give it to someone else. It's like, no, if you've got some time, just break it down, lean in, research it, learn about it. And it's even easier now with, the swathes of information we have on the internet, the AI, although obviously grain of salt with some of the research you get back from that. But, you really can become an expert in anything. And it's a super skill to learn and to be able to do, because it just opens up doors and avenues that, you never knew could be possible.
Yeah, that's actually really good advice, because it can be, quite a common thing for people to be intimidated around doing something that they don't know, but actually it's a superpower if you can look at these things and go, I can figure that out.
Yeah, exactly, right.
And it doesn't stop you drawing on other people who are, the experts in different areas, but if you can stretch yourself a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's cool. And so how did you get into the that council role? That sounds like another kind of, unexpected, jump.
Yeah, so when I finished my degree, I got a role at the Auckland Regional Council, and I was doing policy work in the chief executive's office, and I knew none about what any of that meant. Like, I remember one of my first days in the job, and someone was showing me about, the council minutes, and I've never come across governance before. I didn't understand what I was looking at. Like, the whole thing was just a giant mystery to me. But policy was a great role to sort of learn a wide breadth of how government, local government, central government works. That was how I got into the major events role through sort of a series of other jumps. And from there, I actually went and worked at PwC doing management consulting, which was probably one of my favorite jobs, just because the breadth of subject matter of what I'd work on was so wide. Like, everything from trying to genetically engineer the perfect sheep through to how to bring, economic development into, small rural areas of New Zealand, through to looking at Māori land rights, like just really wide, disparate, different things. And so always moving on to new and different subject matters and learning so much along the way.
Wow. So working within PwC, I'm picking you did a range of of roles there. How was that experience? It must have kept you challenged and engaged.
It was a really great way to extend my skills, to learn a lot. Like every day was challenging. Every day you're learning new things. And it was a really great team as well. Like I loved the social aspect and sort of the team that I got to work with. It was a work hard, play hard kind of environment, but a really fun one. And yeah, huge personal growth through that time.
Fantastic. And you also worked in the banking world.
Yep.
And Air New Zealand. Tell us about those.
Yeah, so I went from PwC into Westpac to join their strategy team. That was a really interesting role. It gave me a lot of visibility across the breadth of banking services. And like banks are really complex institutions, a lot going on there. So from sitting in the strategy role, I got to see across really a wide range of the banking operations, from institutional, corporate, mortgages, lending, cards. Really interesting. And that was where Easy Crypto actually started. From there, I went to a similar corporate strategy role at Air New Zealand. Also really interesting, company with huge capital expenditure, multi-million-dollar planes, complex routes, a lot of decisions around scheduling, logistics, freight, passengers, marketing, a lot of different components go into airline operations. And again, sitting in that strategy role gave a really good visibility across a lot of that.
Yeah. So what stuck with you from Westpac, from being in the banking world and the strategy role? You would have seen all sorts of things. Did you leave with a completely different viewpoint on what a bank is and what the banking sector looks like as an industry?
Probably the main takeaway, which might have been out of my economics degree as well, is just around how banks effectively are creating money, right? Like when you see the dollars in your bank account in your online banking app, that's not real money. You can't go to the bank and actually take out that physical cash. Well, a few people could.
Not if everyone wanted to.
Not everyone, exactly. Yeah. So it's like this social construct, this IOU it's debt with the bank. It's not even debt with the government. So you've got this intermediary between you and government money. And even government money itself is, again, a social construct. Like the fact that $20 note, that little green piece of polymer, can buy you $20 worth of goods and services is purely a social construct between all of us. And it can be affected by inflation, by trust in the government, by international shocks. Like the monetary system is actually immensely fragile. And I think in a country like New Zealand, where we have stable government, we have low rates of corruption, we've got low, relatively well-constrained inflation, it's easy for us to forget that. But it's a really fascinating, having done that degree and then worked in banking, and you get that sort of wider view across the ecosystem.
Often when I talk to technologists, sometimes from that are working in banks, they look at their sector and sort of scratch their heads to a degree, in some ways sort of wondering why banks still exist in their current form. And we've seen so many sectors get disrupted, but the banking sector seems to it doesn't actually seem to have sort of dramatically changed in recent years, despite the pace of technological change and disruption that we've seen in other fields. Has that surprised you? Is that
not having worked on the inside? Because that was, I guess, one of the other things is just how archaic banking systems are. Like there's still physical paper copies of things being moved around the country. Things aren't fully digitized, or paper forms have been taken and inputted from one system to another system by a human. Like maybe things have changed in the last few years and there's more AI involved, but the system has so much tech debt and so much regulatory debt as well, and it makes changes and innovations complex. Like we moved to 7-day banking payments only last year, I think. And it's like that had been on the roadmap for banks for such a long time. Open banking, the ability for intermediaries to use APIs to connect to bank services, that's only just coming out now. And when I was at Westpac 10 years ago, we were getting letters from the Minister of Commerce and Finance to be like, you need to do this. And this stuff takes a long time. And even silly things like I have someone mow my lawns for me. Over summer, they mow them fortnightly. Over winter, they mow them 3 weekly. I can't set up an automatic payment for a 3 weekly payment because it's not one of the settings in my bank. And this is where fintechs come in. And, it's like the new stack, the new things that are built around what customers want. and having open banking to allow them to bridge that gap of here's a customer need and here are legacy systems that just can't accommodate that. Like, that's what's really exciting. So, yes, to your question, banks have not changed for a long time. They're very archaic. They're very slow. Not surprising once you see what's under the hood, but very exciting that even if banks can't make those changes because of the constraints they're working with, other parties can now, and they will be coming out doing that, which is, really cool to see.
Yeah. Now, in terms of the lessons and so on from working in that sort of environment, I guess with some of the the larger firms, there's a level of understanding why things move slowly. Do you learn to be a bit more patient? What lessons do you walk away with, or is it that you walk away with the lesson of, hey, I should be disrupting this and doing something new?
Yeah, I have to say that after doing startup and running my own business, I'll never go back into corporate again. Like, corporates are, obviously very effective in certain areas. They have their place, they're great. But for me personally, I can't work in a corporate where, you might spend a month writing a report, which then goes up the chain to something and then board meeting. And then, it's just like, I love action. I love hustle. I love making things happen, solving problems. And corporate's not typically the place where that kind of attitude flourishes.
And what about in New Zealand? Because that's a whole different environment again, right? And airlines are unusual entities, I suppose. And in New Zealand, there's nothing bigger than Air New Zealand, of course. So what were the things that you that really sort of stuck with you, or that you took away from that learning? Because of course, in New Zealand, probably able to in some areas innovate a little bit, faster and so on. But also they're tied into a whole sort of global system in the way that airlines have to operate and communicate from a technological standpoint as well. So they're not completely unleashed either.
No, and also they've got really strong regulatory frameworks, which, you'd expect, and as a passenger, you're very glad those are in place. So there was actually a lot of parallels between, banking sector with really strong regulatory frameworks around, financial prudence and, those kind of requirements, and then airlines with very strong regulatory requirements around safety. But there was still a lot of scope for innovation. I think that is something that, Air New Zealand is known for and leans into more. Digital innovation, they've really nailed. They've done so great in that space. And then starting to look at innovation, some of the projects we were working on was around unmanned aircraft, drones, electric aircraft, where can aviation go in the next 10, 20, 50 years, which is pretty cool. I actually left Air New Zealand just before COVID, and in some respects that was a really disappointing time, because I'm like, I can't think of a more interesting time to do strategy for an airline than during a global pandemic when everything's grounded. But it actually worked out to be a really good time to go full-time in Easy Crypto as well.
So tell us how it all came about with Easy Crypto, and what was the beginning piece like? Because you're obviously doing that while you were doing other jobs, so this wasn't something you were able to be full time in, and how it all kicked off.
Yeah, so my journey with cryptocurrency, I started getting involved in crypto back in 2014, and I just remember reading about it on an internet forum somewhere, and, with my background in economics and finance, I was like, oh, this makes so much sense. We have this globally connected village with the internet, instant communications anywhere in the world, but we don't have a global payment system. So I got involved, just to understand how it worked, and I thought it would be the next big thing. And then for a couple of years, just nothing happened. I'm not very good at predicting future trends, is one of my learnings. I also thought the iPad was, ridiculous. Why would you want a thing without a keyboard? So, don't ever trust me as a futurist.
So, saying that, you are a futurist. I'll just set the record straight. Having started Easy Crypto, you are a futurist, Janine. You don't have to have it across all domains. I'll let you continue.
Right, definitely. I mean, this is another startup learning, right? Is that just being at the right time. Timing is everything in startup, and we were really lucky that we timed it well. Yeah, in 2017, when crypto kind of came into the mainstream consciousness, people were talking about Bitcoin and blockchain. It was headlines in the media for, I think, the first time ever. And at that stage, I was working at Westpac, and because I knew things about crypto, people expected me to be the expert. And, going back to that overnight expert thing, narrow subject matter, small at those stages. So when people ask me questions, I'd be madly researching and then I'd come back with the answer. So I really extended my knowledge just by being the crypto expert in the bank. I earned the moniker J-Coin. So to my Westpac colleagues, I'm still J-Coin. And I remember one time I gave a presentation to, probably about 400 people around the bank. I think I almost threw up beforehand. I was so nervous about doing public speaking. So, come a long way. But gave a 101 on what is Bitcoin and blockchain. And that was really the start of Easy Crypto because I was giving these presentations, people would always ask me, how do I buy some? How do I get involved? And it wasn't particularly easy in New Zealand. And it also wasn't cheap. There was typically around a 15% markup for Kiwis buying digital assets, which made no sense when it's a fully digital product, no shipping cost, why are we having to pay so much extra?
I remember the frustration myself, right? Because I would keep hearing about it. I'd keep bumping into people, over quite a period of years. And then every time, this is really, really difficult.
You had a few ATMs, but then they were often broken. You had local Bitcoins, but, that's peer-to-peer and, they were pretty, trustworthy people. It wasn't sketchy and scammy back then, but it was still that friction and that's where it was quite expensive. Or you had to go offshore and then you're like, well, I'm wiring my money to who knows what company, who knows where, and like, was this going to work? So my brother was doing a lot of buying on behalf of friends and family, and he was, thinking there must be an easier way to do this. So this is a story that I have told a lot, but it's a great one and absolutely true in that he started by Googling what language are people coding in these days. He'd had a tech background, but more of a, systems admin, not coding. So he taught himself how to code by building the first version of Easy Crypto. And from start to finish, that was 5 days.
Wow.
And then he puts it live on the internet and strangers are giving him money for this magical internet money thing. And they're just depositing money in his bank account and he's buying them crypto and sending it to them. And he tells me about this and I'm like, oh my God, take this thing offline right now. I don't know how many rules you're breaking. I don't know how many laws this is in contravention of, but I'm like, I don't think you can just do that. And so again, this is where the becoming an overnight expert in a subject matter comes in handy because I didn't know and no one could tell me what are the rules for running a crypto business in New Zealand. There was no how-to guide. The FMA didn't have a page on crypto like they do now. It was very much, well, here's all of New Zealand's legislation. Go and figure out which ones applied to us. So that was my summer holiday, 2017, 2018, was reading all of the AML regulations, Financial Market Conduct Act, financial services provider stuff, and trying to figure out how did we fit in, what did we need to do, and how did this apply to us? And also, how do we build our business to be compliant from day one? Because that was really important. I was like, if we're going to do this, we need to be compliant because A, it's the right thing to do, but B, it's how you stay in business, right? Crypto is seen as weird and sketchy and dodgy already, so we need to make sure that we're wider than wide and that we're, really good citizens in the space and ticking all the right boxes.
And I think at that stage, possibly been other businesses that had sprung up and had varying challenges or already shut down in terms of within crypto in New Zealand.
Yeah, we started not long before Cryptopia shut down. So they were quite a different business model from us because they were running an exchange and they were also open to anyone anywhere in the world, which I think caused them quite a lot of, growth challenges. They just had immense growth and they also weren't doing KYC, sort of like the know your customer AML stuff of who are you? Give me your ID, let's check who you are. So a whole lot of sort of concerns rolled up in that. There were a few other players, smaller players as well, but it was very hard to get banking as well. And that was one of the other challenges was, you can't run a business without a bank account. But if you're crypto, you couldn't get a bank account. And so it was very hard to start a crypto business or to keep one going if you're running it out of your personal bank accounts and sort of playing whack-a-mole with the banks.
Right. So this must have been an area that you spend a lot of time figuring out. Was being in the banking world, helpful in terms of connections, who to talk to and how to figure it out? Or did it sort of feel in some ways a bit harder?
Oh my goodness. I just naively assumed that because I worked for a bank, I was like, well, of course I'll go set up, because they're always encouraging us to, set up our bank accounts with them. So I just walked downstairs. We had an in-house banking team, walked downstairs, opened an account, thought that was all good. Next week I get a call from the head of risk being like, what do you think you're doing? And they had no appetite for taking on a crypto business. But one of the things that was good for me working in a bank, there was no connections, there was no access to banking, but it did give me a really good understanding over the types of compliance requirements. Like I knew about AML and KYC, like everyone in the bank gets training on that. So it was not something that I didn't have any awareness of. So what it helped was that I understood what requirements there were, and I prepared a really solid compliance program. Like, we had a 60-page compliance program, before we'd even started business. And I took that and, went around all of the banks in New Zealand. I quickly found out that if you go in the front door, someone will say yes, and then someone behind them will say no. So I started approaching directly to risk and compliance teams and, sending them our compliance program, showing that we knew what we were doing. We weren't just some dodgy, weird crypto business. And I got rejected by every bank in New Zealand at least once, most of them 2 or 3 times. And then I tried a different tack of, and this is one of my other learnings that I think is really important, particularly in a country like New Zealand, was using my network. So New Zealand, very small country, everything you need, I believe, is one connection away in your network. So I went to my LinkedIn and I searched for every single person, or I think I even went through every single connection I had and, to see whether they worked in a bank or had previously worked in a bank. And I messaged every single one of them and said, hey, this is what we're doing. Here's our compliance program. Can you help, or can you send me to someone who can? And one of those people sent me to someone who sent me to someone who said, I'll take a look at this for you. So yeah, a lot of persistence, a lot of hard work.
If that hadn't have happened, if you hadn't have done that LinkedIn piece and tried to move forward, what would have happened? Was that the end
We
of it?
wouldn't be here today because, I'm a very persistent person and, I would have kept trying other avenues. Maybe I would have found something else, but that was really a huge unlock for us. And it's a little bit frustrating. There's this misnomer out in the crypto industry that because I worked in a bank, I had this easy road and got a bank account, easily, whereas everyone else couldn't start a crypto business because they couldn't get banking. I'm like, it wasn't easy. It was anything but easy. I had no free rides. I had no hand ups. I just had a lot of hard work and hustle. But we were lucky. Like if we hadn't got that bank account, we probably wouldn't be in business today. The easy crypto wouldn't have happened. The exit wouldn't have happened. We wouldn't have been having this conversation. Like it's sort of a little bit, it's quite unfair that my whole business hinged on getting that access to a bank account and that so many other businesses couldn't get access to a bank account, because that should be a given, right? If you're a legally operating company that is not breaking any rules, you shouldn't be denied access to banking. This is one of my bugbears.
Yes, there's probably quite a big topic that we could go on to. We might save that for another podcast, because it does interest me that there isn't that necessary, that right, from a banking perspective.
And it is a bit of an interesting one in that banks are given the keys, they're the gatekeepers of the financial system, but they don't have an obligation to have to onboard you. And, there's understandable reasons why. There's risks, there's costs, etc. But like there is a bit of I think something that over the next few years will need to get looked at, because, as they'll say no to more and more industries, there's going to be more and more parts of the economy that are excluded, which is problematic.
Yeah. I think it'd be a problem for anyone if for an individual or for if it's a legitimate business that can't bank. So yeah, that's interesting. So okay, so you got a bank account.
We got a bank account, and more importantly, we kept our bank account.
Yeah, because others were seeing they would get rolling, and then bank accounts would get shut down.
Yeah, and we saw that with people coming in from overseas. They might get a bank account initially, and then would get shut down, or people would be moving around banks. And a lot of this was because of fraud and scams. And I completely understand why banks, they've got an increasing responsibility to compensate their customers if the customers are caught in fraud and scams. It's a complex area, but that is a real cost to the bank. And if they can reduce the amount of fraud and scams by closing down crypto platforms, you can understand why that happens. So we worked really closely with the bank that we were with. We worked incredibly hard to reduce the amount of fraud and scams, not just to keep our bank account, but because ethically we didn't want people to be losing their money through crypto investing with bad actors. And it's something that is I think we've all seen how much fraud and scams are increasing in prevalence, and I think it's something that New Zealand does need to do more on, and it's something that I'm personally really passionate about because it's so heartbreaking to see firsthand the impacts of that.
Oh, it is. It's terrible, and yeah, it still doesn't seem easy to kind of de-risk everybody.
Yeah.
Okay, so what happened in that period while you were still doing other work with Westpac and then Air New Zealand with Easy Crypto during that window of time where you were having to juggle both?
Yeah, those were really hard years because we weren't a SaaS business. We were in a market that's incredibly volatile, and Bitcoin might be riding high one month and people are really keen to invest, and then it might drop, and then all of a sudden your customer base kind of evaporates. And so we had very low predictability of revenue.
Right, compared to say the software, the SaaS business where you got monthly committed revenue that just keeps coming in regardless.
And even most physical products, right? Like if you're selling shoes or water bottles, you've got a reasonable expectation of what next month's revenue will be based on last month's. Not for us. So we really struggled with being able to predict revenues and therefore being able to budget and hire in new staff, because if you've got sticky costs, you want some, either money in the bank or ability to predict. We weren't able to raise because we were crypto.
Nobody wanted to invest at that
So
point.
that was one of the main reasons why I still had my day job, is that my salary was kind of like our buffer against the instability and uncertainty of our revenues. And, we could use that to pay our staff if we needed to. Never had to dip into that. So that was great. But it did mean that I wasn't I didn't feel financially free to go all in on the business until 2020. COVID times.
Yeah, I guess that volatility of crypto, over that time, was that the sort of the direct indicator what the price was doing as to how interested people were in buying, or was it really hard to actually just figure out what was going to happen? I guess you wouldn't know what was going to happen to the price of crypto. So.
Yeah, we couldn't predict the price, but what we did see was that when it was volatile, we got a lot more trading activity. So it could be, moving up or moving down, but as long as it's got big price action, people are interested and they're involved. On the months where the prices just kind of did this, that's when trading, would reduce much more significantly. And so volatility up is great because people are trading and they're happy. Volatility down is okay because people are still trading, but low volatility just, wasn't good for sales.
Yeah, okay. Yep, that's tough. And so, your revenue was effectively a clip the ticket, a small percentage of the transaction.
That's right.
Yeah. So come through to 2020, and what was the thing that sort of triggered the change for you to move full time?
I can't actually remember. I think maybe it was just that we had, the business had started to grow to a level that we had enough revenue coming in. I was, completely over it with working 2 jobs. And, I'd been spending all my nights and weekends going to crypto meetups as well to sort of help market and put ourselves out there. So, yeah, it was really good timing in hindsight, because I went full time on the business just before COVID. And COVID was a fascinating time for us. Like, I know it was really hard for a lot of businesses and a lot of people personally. For us, it was the first time that my co-founder and I were in the same country. We were actually co-located down at our parents' house. He'd come back from where he was traveling. I'd dropped down from Auckland, and we worked together for the first time, which was phenomenal. Like, we just got so much done. And we had amazing customer growth over that time as well. I think partially because the global financial system was having a lot of shocks and people were very nervous about it. So, diversifying into something different was quite attractive. Partially because people now had the time, I think, to look at it. Like, it had probably been on people's to-do list for a long time. Look at that Bitcoin thing, work out what it is. And then when COVID hit, people actually had time to go and do, take those steps. But I think thirdly, and probably most importantly, was, and I don't know if people have really sort of thought about this much, but COVID really demystified digital for us. Like, digital went from being quite fringe to Zoom meetings, you're having video calls online, countdown shopping, you're doing all your shopping online, QR codes were a thing. Like, we had this massive lift in digital comfort, which I think really helped crypto. Before COVID, people would always say to me, but how can Bitcoin have any value if it's not an actual thing? Like, I can't hold it, touch it, feel it. People don't ask that anymore.
Yeah, I think you're right, because we did see that acceptance come during that window of time of, digital money, that's inevitable, right?
Yeah.
And but before that, it was a very different mindset. And look, I'm sure it's different for everybody, but it definitely became, I think, more obvious to me that that this sort of thing had made sense.
And our growth over that time, like over those first 6 months or so of COVID, was immense. Like, we had there's this framed media newspaper article on the wall in Mum and Dad's office, which was the first time that we appeared in print media with Easy Crypto. And there's this little quote about how 18 months after starting the business, we've turned over, $10 million in sales, which was a huge milestone at the time. And that would have been 2019. And then during COVID, we were turning over $10 million a day.
Wow.
And so it was just like that massive, growth curve was incredible. And it was a real wild ride over that time.
Yeah. Wow. And, what were the first kind of big challenges once you'd really thrown your hat in the ring, you're doing this thing full time, so you didn't have those external, salary to sort of lean back on and so on. Was that a challenge, or because of the volatility you just were doing business so quickly that actually the financial side was a lot easier?
The financial side was a lot easier. The staffing side then became a lot more complex. So particularly for developers, like, we'd had this development team of one, which works very well because all the knowledge is in here, all the systems are understood. Going from 1 to 2 was probably one of the hardest transitions in the business in terms of employment. And then both Alan and I, neither of us had ever managed people. Well, he might have in one of his previous job roles, but it wasn't something he liked doing. And, through this journey, I found out that I'm a great leader, but a terrible manager. And so in those early days of COVID, us having to bring on more staff and trying to manage them without being great at being managers, and that was really challenging. It got a lot easier when the business was bigger, and then I had a really great C-suite underneath me who could manage people and didn't need managing themselves. But in the early years, apologies to all my staff from back then, because it was, it wasn't the easiest time. Like, our culture was great, the business was great, but we really struggled with sort of some of the functional aspects of growing teams.
So moving into having and building that team, I'm picking with the growth of the business that it just became quite obvious that you needed to start hiring. There was too much going on, and you needed to develop the technology. What were the other aspects that you can remember that really helped you make that decision from the two of you to really building a team, which I take it grew reasonably quickly too?
Yeah, so customer support was one of the really obvious ones because, gets to the point where, as the founder, you can't answer every customer inquiry. Marketing, and also a lot of the marketing automation. So like getting our automated emails going out, getting our social media, getting our, SEO, like that kind of stuff. Development, obviously, we, hired, my brother had been in Malaysia, and so we hired a development team up in Malaysia. What else? It felt a bit ad hoc. We were just kind of plugging gaps where we found them, and sometimes a bit organically as well. Like, one of my friends came on board. Initially she just helped me design some business cards because she was a graphic designer.
Okay.
And then I think we were a bit swamped on the help desk one day, so she came in to help with that. And then she ended up being, she's got very good technical skills and very smart, and she's ended up being this kind of like glue between tech and customer support and compliance, and helping those things all work well together. And she's still with the business today. But there was a fair bit of organic, just plugging people into roles without quite knowing exactly what we needed, and just, building the plane as we're flying it.
Yeah. Did that put you under a lot of stress trying to work these things out and work out how to manage and lead the team?
I don't think so. Like, we just felt like we were thriving. Like, everything was moving fast. We were scaling, growing. Like, the metrics were all moving in the right direction, which really helps, because I think a lot of time in startup you can be really bashing your head against a brick wall trying to grow or trying to enter a market, whereas this was we just had this big tidal wave of growth behind us. We made mistakes on the way, like we hired people who didn't work out, or we tried to do partnerships with companies that just, the whole thing wasn't a good idea. But overall, we seem to be moving in the right direction and, just organically finding our way and figuring it out, and things mostly seem to work pretty well.
So walk us through the partnership sort of things that you looked at. What did you see as kind of opportunities that made sense for a partnership, and what was the lesson in hindsight once you'd experimented with them?
Yeah, it's a really tough one. There were some of my lessons from partnerships were that no one is going to care about your customer as much as you do. So if you're outsourcing part of your customer journey, unless you're really convinced that that company is going to deliver it seamlessly, you need to be prepared to sacrifice customer outcomes and customer happiness. And for a business like ours, that actually wasn't something we were prepared to do. So we had, for example, we'd outsource, payment rails to companies who were like, oh, we can give you card processing, but it wasn't a good experience for our customers, and we ended up turning it off because while we could open up a new market, open up a new channel for our customers to be able to pay with credit cards, to have 1 in 10 customers have a suboptimal experience through that flow wasn't good enough. We also partnered with an exchange, which, our business we were non-custodial. So if you buy crypto from me, you're like, okay, Janine, here's $100. I'm go, great, Paul, here's your Bitcoin, and I deliver it directly to you. I'm not storing it for you. We were unusual in that business model, and as it turns out, it was the wrong business model to pick. Like, we would have been more profitable and been able to offer more breadth of services to customers if we'd been an exchange. We didn't go down that route because we didn't want to be a honeypot, risk losing people's funds. Cryptopia wasn't that long ago, and so we thought it was safer and better for customers if we didn't hold their money for them. But hindsight 2020, I think that was the wrong decision, but it was a safe decision. But we did at one point try to partner with an exchange because we're like, well, people want these products. They want to be able to do exchange-based trading. They can go through us. But the exchange product that we partnered with, again, the user experience just wasn't at the standard that we were at. So some of our customers tried it, didn't enjoy it. They didn't get the good customer support. And it was just those challenges of, partnership is really hard. Like, it can be done well, but you've got to really think through the things that you lose control over, and if they impact your end user, in our experience, it wasn't worth it.
Yeah. Okay. And now the volatility of cryptocurrencies hasn't, it's not completely disappeared. So,
What?
Ever. But I guess you had some periods there where crypto went really nuts, right? From 2020, where the price is probably better than I do, but some stages it's maybe 10,000 New Zealand dollars for one Bitcoin. And then, we saw those numbers go up to sort of, over 80,000, and then kind of come down again. What was that like for you? Because you grew out quite a big team, didn't you? Whilst people were going nuts, locked at home, what do we do?
Yeah.
Oh, well, let's sell this and invest it in crypto. Walk us through the kind of the highs and lows of that.
The lows here are really low. This journey of that price action that you're talking about also coincided with when we raised our Series A, our first fundraise actually, because we hadn't been able to get angel or seed investing. In 2021, we went out we actually started in 2020 going out to raise funds. Well, actually, we started in 2020 trying to sell the business. This is a long story. I'll just give you the cliff notes.
We went out to sell the business?
Yeah.
I hadn't heard that.
There you go. All right. Here's a hot new take. This is the real story about how we did our Series A funding was that in 2020, we'd grown the business. We'd gone through that COVID period. We were profitable, had good revenues, had a good position in the New Zealand market. And we're like, this thing could scale and go global, but obviously me and my co-founder, we're like, we're not the right people to do this, because what do we know about growing a business globally? Like, we just kind of built this thing by accident, but it's proven to be successful. So this would be a great time to hand it over to someone who can take it and make it, help it realize its potential. So we got some investment bankers on board, started going out globally to try to sell this business. I had a lot of conversations with potential buyers, and we did get some offers which weren't quite compelling enough to sell. But what I really got through that was through the conversations with potential buyers and the feedback they gave me on what we'd built and what we'd done. It built my confidence massively. And it was an interesting reflection that, everyone, we all say, oh, it's lonely at the top and it's hard being a CEO and a founder. But one of the things that you don't get is you don't get any feedback. Like, you don't have a boss giving you a performance review and saying how you've done. And I guess, I could look at the company that I'd built and look at my revenues and look at my staff culture and look at our tech and be like, this is all good. But I hadn't realized, I guess I didn't back myself as being, the right person until I tried to sell it, got all this feedback from people about myself and what I'd done, and realized that actually the best person to help grow my company is me.
Yeah, and I mean, and I imagine, this was probably the common sort of scenario. If somebody was interested in buying it, they would have wanted you to go with it anyway, right?
Yeah, exactly, right. So it was a lot of positive feedback about myself as a leader and as a founder, and so we pivoted from trying to sell the business to trying to fundraise, and that took us quite a long time because, again, crypto. We did have a lot of investors be like, oh, look, we're interested in joining around. Once you have a lead investor, let us know. But getting a lead investor, so difficult. So I think it took us 13 months to get a lead investor. And then we went from the day we had a lead investor, we were oversubscribed for the round within 2 weeks. So it's just like absolute nuts. So that was kind of at the highs of us going out, raising funds, getting, we set a record for the largest first funding round in New Zealand because we'd not taken any money prior. Not necessarily
who led that round?
So that was led by Nuance Connected Capital, so Nio Merrick. And, doing large fundraisers is probably not something that should be bragged about. I mean, you heard Jovan from Emerge on here just recently, right? And one of my favorite quotes from him is, $17 million is 17 million promises. And so, it was this amazing big high to do this massive round, but then huge, expectations and roadmap that we needed to deliver on, which was great and all well and good at the point of time when we signed those documents and took that money. But within just a few months after that, crypto fell off a cliff. So the prices dropped in half. Terra Luna collapsed. That was followed by FTX collapsing. The industry was just in a shambles. Our raise had been predicated on us going out and growing globally, but it was not the right market to attract new customers. No one wanted in on crypto. The people who were already in were getting out. New customers were not flocking in like they had been, 6 months earlier. And it put us in a really tough position because we had a lot of burn, had a lot of staff costs. We were over 100 team members at that point. But we weren't making the revenues that we needed to sustain those costs, and our runway was shrinking. And so, the board...
How long do you think you had if you'd kept, your team and kept, spending at the rate you were spending? How long?
Less than a year.
Yeah.
Probably 8 months, yeah. And so the board pulled me aside and said, hey, you've got to get the company back to cost neutral. And I was like, no way, our costs we've got some tech costs, and obviously we, no more spend on marketing, but we've got a lot of staff, and that's a really big impact on people and people's lives. And it was a really, really tough time for me personally. A lot of lessons out of that. And I talked about this at Startup Week last week. But yeah, some of the big lessons for me were that you actually have to be able to make those calls, because the worst thing I could have done would be to, ignore that and just keep going, because then I would have had to make the entire team redundant when we ran out of money, right? So it's having to act in the best interest of the company is also in the best interest of the team. And the other big learning for me out of that was that it is possible to go through really hard situations like that, going through restructures, but do it in a way that is transparent and honest, and people leave feeling respected and feeling that they've been looked after as best they can through something that was a pretty shitty situation to go through.
And so tell us around how, the forming of the board, because obviously, to start with, it's you and Ellen.
Yep.
And, you make all the calls together.
The good old days. Yeah.
And then you had this board telling you, hey, you need to let go, dozens of people. And you listened and you proceeded with that advice, but must be a bit of a journey to get to that point.
I'm really grateful for our board, and it was a really interesting journey for me personally, because I'd come out of working in corporates and with a lot of corporates, through my PwC days, where I didn't have a lot of respect for governance, because I'd seen firsthand board members turn up to meetings where they clearly hadn't read the board papers. They asked some stupid question just to make it look like they're engaged, and that question was already answered in the paper and it wasn't relevant anyway. And, I just looked at this function of governance and it was like, how does that add value? And so I hadn't put a board in place for Easy Crypto prior. When we did our Series A, the investors required it, as is, good practice. And so, I was a little bit skeptical of what is this group of people going to be doing and how will it help? But my board was really fantastic. So I had Caroline Williams came on as our chair. So the investors had, given me a couple of names of leads. I met with a few people. And just when I met with her, I was like, she's incredibly smart. She's got a legal background, which is, really helpful in our industry, very pragmatic. And I was just like, she'll be amazing. And she was. So she's been a great board chair. We had Nio as our investor director, Mitchell Pham, who, Mr. FinTech, came on board, which was amazing. And Heather Gatineau from, she has been with GD1, but she wasn't on our board in that capacity. She was on as sort of like a previous entrepreneur marketer. And we very intentionally built a board that was quite, well-rounded in terms of what we needed. Like I made a matrix of all of the skills that we need, everything from finance, strategy, marketing, tech, global expansion, and mapped our directors' strengths in those different areas to make sure that we weren't overly weighted in one area or had, lacking capacity in another area. So for anyone building boards, it's a really important exercise to try to get that breadth. But my board was incredibly valuable for me. Like they really gave me a lot of support. Again, that lonely at the top thing, they were the people that I could turn to when I was really struggling and didn't know where to go. And they were also the people that held me accountable, made sure I was always, doing the right thing and sort of not forgetting about the various stakeholders I had to look after. And they were the people who told me when I had to take hard action that I would not have otherwise taken, like in that situation in 22.
And how, because you had really sort of handpicked your board, was it very quick for you to gain that confidence in them because you had been confident to put them on the board anyway? Or was there still a little bit of time of having to getting a bit of a feel for them? Because I imagine this must have happened. This was quite quick, like between when you had established the board and when they're telling you to make this really big decision. Yeah. Which just a really difficult position to be in.
Yeah, it's a good point, and I guess. It would have been within the first year, and we had obviously established trust through that. I also knew a few of the board members, so Nio and Mitchell I knew in advance, and I really respected them and their smarts and decision making, and so I think that probably helped. But also, like ultimately, I knew the board were telling me the right thing. I just, I didn't want to see it myself, and I would not have made that decision. I had to be pushed, but I knew there actually wasn't another option. So, it was challenging.
And how did you execute that? How did that go down with your team? How did you deal with those conversations?
Yeah, it's so hard, and particularly in New Zealand where employment law requires you to follow certain processes, which there's good reasons for those processes. And, we genuinely consulted, like, you have to have consultation windows that are certain lengths of time, put out documentation packs. It is good in that, I would hope that most businesses going through a restructure, even in our case when it was financially driven, so there wasn't a lot of choice that we had, we still took on board people's feedback and made a number of changes based on consultation. So consultation, can be actually properly done and not just a box tick of here's a pack, you have 7 days for us to ignore your feedback, which is what you see, I think, too often in corporates. So we did take on board feedback through consultation, but the consultation process itself is really challenging for staff because you're going through this uncertainty and you have to have these certain windows, and it just makes people unsettled for so much longer, which is really unfortunate. So that was sort of one of the things that you can't do much about. That it is what it is. But the other things that we did was, I was super transparent with the team. Like everyone knew what we were doing and why. I didn't try to sugarcoat things. I was really honest about the mistakes that I'd made that had gotten us there. My co-founder and I went down to 0 salary. Like, it wasn't going to change the course of our company and it wasn't going to, massively make any difference. But it was kind of like we were owning, what we had got to as well. And the feedback that I had from people who did, left through that process was that they felt that they had been taken care of and they felt respected. And I think, it's not something, in the ideal world, we would never have got into that position, and I'd never want to get into that position again. But if you are a founder who is in a position where you have to make people redundant, you can do it in a way that is, honest and respectful and leaves people feeling positive towards the company, which is strange, but it is possible.
Well done. Yeah, these things are really hard. Now, so you downsized. What sort of size did you end up on at that point? Because you were around 100.
Yeah.
And then, so you were okay. Yeah. So what's that next phase forward? Because this was 2023.
Yeah. So after that, we did a big regroup on our strategy, and we had been going for international expansion. But again, like I said, it wasn't the right time in the market. We'd also had a number of significant setbacks in terms of regulatory changes in some of the markets that we're going into. Governments putting a moratorium on issuing new licenses for cryptocurrencies or cryptocurrency exchanges, or changing regulations around what type of business model you could run, things that made it, we pretty much had to strike off some of our expansion strategies. They were not feasible anymore. So we switched into a product expansion strategy instead, so focusing more on our existing markets of Australia, New Zealand and South Africa, and that was when we built the wallet and the New Zealand dollar stablecoin. So it was an interesting change. It was great, I think, for us to have, particularly coming off the back of a time of, retraction, pulling back and having to reduce the team size, to have a really clear strategy and a growth path for everyone that's still there to get in behind and to have sort of like hope and, give them that kind of path forward, I think is really important.
And we didn't sort of go into how you got into Australia and South Africa. How did that play out?
So those were both a little bit opportunistic. Like we did our strategy was around the global south. We wanted to take cryptocurrency to places where it was perhaps less accessible. And also, we saw the typical strategy of, Australia, Canada, UK, Europe. We're like, why those countries? In hindsight, I have a much better understanding now of why those countries, and probably would recommend a lot of startups go there. But we were like, let's do the global south and let's, help improve financial well-being in countries who need it the most. Australia's a funny story, actually. You got time for a story on that one?
Yeah.
So when we started Easy Crypto, we weren't able to advertise anywhere. There was no advertising on Facebook, on Google, on LinkedIn, YouTube. It was all closed to us because we were a crypto business. So the only ways that we could get our name out there was physically going to meetups. So every night of the week that there was a crypto meetup, I was there, and also being part of online communities and just, being visible and being around. And so I was on all of the Facebook groups and Discord groups and this and that. And on one of these groups, crypto has this big thing against shilling. Like you don't promote your own product. That's a big no-no. So I wasn't there saying, hey, Easy Crypto. I was just there answering questions, building my reputation, being helpful, and being a valuable member of the community. And then one day someone's like, hey, we're in New Zealand, can I buy crypto? And I was like, oh, I know the answer to this one. So I was like, you can use my website. Here it is. Immediately, I got banned from the group. I was like, what? So I contacted the moderator and I was like, dude, come on. I've been a really valuable contributor. Look at my past history. And that was a directly, applicable answer to that question.
Yeah.
Why the ban? And he was like, oh, tell me more about this crypto thing. We started chatting and I was explaining to him what we did. And he was like, this sounds really cool. Can I franchise it in Australia, which is where he was based? So that's how we got our head of Australia.
Oh, that's incredible.
Yeah, and he's still, he's been right through with the business, right through to, when we ended up exiting. And yeah, he's a great guy. And it's just, kind of funny how these things happen.
Wow. And South Africa, was South Africa a market where crypto was very hard to get at that point? Or
Yeah, in South Africa, because they have capital controls, it's actually still very complex running a crypto business there. But we had a South African who was living here in New Zealand and had been looking at, because, he had been using cryptocurrency as a way to move funds for international imports and exports. And so he was like, this is great. I need to, get this into South Africa. And he'd been working with Cryptopia to license their product into South Africa. And then Cryptopia went down and someone was like, oh, you should go talk to Janine at Easy Crypto. She might be able to help you. So that's how that one started. So again, these things were often quite circumstantial and happenstance, but a lot of, international expansions, you need the right people, you need good people in markets. So going through networks and finding people through either, connections or through being kicked out of Facebook groups is a great avenue.
Yeah. Were there any tough stories in terms of international expansion where it didn't work out so well, or were you didn't sort of gain the traction?
Yeah, so many. Like our expansions into Southeast Asia were really hard. We had, Philippines was a devastating one because we'd been working on our the licensing and regulatory requirements around crypto made it one of the most complex types of businesses I think I could have tried to scale globally, right? Because like with a SaaS business, you're just like launching a new market, make sure I've got tax covered, transfer pricing, good to go. With crypto, it was not only a financial product, but it was a financial product that wasn't well regulated or wasn't consistently regulated, or regulation was changing, which made it really hard. And you had these incumbents, like in the Philippines, there were a couple of local companies who had sprung up without any regulation. They weren't compliant with any regulation, but they were trading. And so then as the government started to build regulation, they built it around these companies. And there were these really odd things, like when you were trying to apply for a license, if you weren't already trading, you couldn't tick the boxes that you needed to tick to get a license. But if you didn't want to start trading without a license, then, it was a bit of a chicken and egg. And we'd been going through this process, and it was like had taken us months of pulling together all of the documentation and getting tech set up. There's a lot of onshoring requirements. And we were about, a month away from finishing, and they came out and said, end of, 1 week's time, moratorium on all new license applications.
Oh.
And we were like, we can't get everything together in 1 week. Like we tried, like I worked 24 hours a day for that week and tried to pull together everything I could, submitted it, and then we got failed because we hadn't, ticked XYZ box, which, it was just devastating. It was like all of those months of work, just, what can you do? Yeah.
And the Philippines market would have been quite a sizable market, right?
Yeah.
20 times the population.
And
New
also
Zealand.
like a really attractive one for us with the remittances between South Africa, Philippines, Australia, and New Zealand. Like, there's a lot of international payment flows. So it would have been a great market to get into. A complex one for sort of regulation and AML as well. But, there's always ways to solve those problems and to ensure compliance. But in this case, yeah.
And ultimately, 2025, tell us what the journey was to the exit.
When I do get asked by founders, how do you know when the right time to sell is? I'm like, I don't think there is a way to know. And I don't think there is a right time either. We could have kept going. We could still be trading today. I could still be running the business, or we could have gone down this path. And I think they're both viable options. But what made us decide to look at selling when we did was a combination of factors. One was the increasing regulatory requirements, which, it's great that regulation is increasing and there's more compliance coming out, but it does add a lot of cost, and you need economies of scale to soak up those costs, which we, on a global view in terms of crypto companies, we're pretty small. And so the costs that were being put onto us, it was, hard for us to start soaking those up. Similarly with cybersecurity, like there is immensely increasing requirements for investment in that area. And big business, that's great. Small business, that's a harder one to manage. There's also increasing complexity. So when we started Easy Crypto, I don't think stablecoins were even a thing. There was like a couple of blockchains. There was the Bitcoin blockchain, Litecoin, Ethereum. By the time we got to 2025, there were, I don't know how many blockchains that we were supporting, maybe 24 different blockchains that we're supporting, hundreds of different coins. You've got the wallet itself has huge amounts of complexity in that, and complexity was just increasing day in, day out in the industry. So again, economies of scale to maintain and keep up with that complexity and the increasing risk that you introduce with increasing complexity. So there's all these sort of different factors, and we were seeing a trend starting towards global consolidation of cryptocurrency players. So we're like, look, this is going to start happening. Now might be, a good time. We'd had an approach from an international company looking to buy us. The offer wasn't good enough for us to jump at it, but it made us go, if we've had one approach, there'll be others out there, and we should test the market and see what there is. So yeah, we launched a global process, talked to a bunch of companies, got a few offers, and ended up selling to our Australian counterpart, SwiftX.
Yeah. How easy was that sort of process in terms of the backwards and forwards and actually landing a deal and fully signing off?
When you talk with founders, everyone is like, raising capital is really hard. It takes so much longer than you expect and so much more work. And selling a business is the same. We actually went through 2 full sale processes because we had one that fell over, pretty close to the end of the line. And just the amount of information and detail, it's a full-time job. And I was really lucky that I had, a really great C-suite who stepped up and pretty much took, I was still doing external facing stuff like media, and I was still fronting the leadership team to my team internally, because obviously you can't tell your team that you're selling a business, which is, that was one of the worst things for me, was having to be duplicitous about where we're going with our strategy. Running both these strategies, continue to grow and sell, and running them in parallel, but only being able to be upfront and above the board on one of them. I hated that. But yeah, I was pretty much working full time on sale, and I had, backfilled myself with my C-suite, which was necessary. I don't think I could have survived if I was trying to do both my job and this sort of simultaneously. It's a lot of work.
And you had to go through it twice. So the first one that you got quite close to the line,
yeah.
Did you take away some good lessons to bring into, the next opportunity to make that run a little bit smoother and easier?
I thought I had, but then it was just as bad. So yeah, I'm not sure, honestly. Like there was definitely stuff around our data room and information, and just getting that together in a way that was more simple and clean, that I think if I could do it again, would have had a lot more focus on that. And yeah, the process, I think, just also being prepared for how long it goes, and yeah.
And I guess a lot of this comes down to just what any purchaser wants to see, and it's there'll be certain elements that are going to be the same from one to another, but then each buyer, I'm sure, has their own unique perspectives that they're looking at and things that they want to dig deeper on versus what somebody else would. Was that
100%?
That was your experience?
Yeah.
So okay, so it wasn't just, oh yeah, we've done the work, this is quick and easy. It was
no. And then you'd prepare this whole data room, and then you'll get this list of like 300 questions that have obviously been pulled together by a legal team from their template of every M&A they've ever done. And then you're trying to map, well, I'm like, well, I've already provided that in this place in the data room and this. And then so, it's just all so time consuming. Maybe AI could help with that. Maybe we can develop some AI that just makes that process a lot simpler.
Yeah. Now, we mentioned earlier, often when an acquisition is happening, there's that requirement that the founder sort of goes with it in some scenarios. But of course, that doesn't actually suit every situation.
Yeah.
And so was that one of your things was, look, if I'm handing over and you're a bigger entity, you don't need me, and, I'm not going to be sticking around for, X period. Was that how you went into it, or was that something you were able to kind of, work in as part of the process?
Yeah, I was open to how that would play out because I think, again, every transaction will be different, every situation. The first deal that we talked about, the requirement was for me to stay for 3 years, and there was actually like $1 million riding on that. That's not $1 million that I would get personally. That's deal, like I had to stick around or else the deal would forfeit that. With SwiftX, we've been a lot more fluid around how am I best able to help with the transition? Do you need me in the business going forward? What does that look like? And we're still working through that. So yeah, I'm still around at the moment, and I'm still helping with transition and bits and pieces. But yeah, I think as a founder, it's when it's not your baby anymore, it's sometimes a bit hard to fold in, in other places. Because like, what is my actual skill sets? Like, honestly, Paul, I don't know. So I don't have a natural home where I can be like, well, clearly I'm a marketing person, so put me there. I'm just like, I just was the bit of everything, wear lots of hats and delegate a lot. So
and that's what often makes these things possible, right? Because there wouldn't, without that sort of mix of skills, you wouldn't have been able to build what you built.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what are you left with in terms of lessons from this journey? What are the things that stand out for you so far that you'll take with you into the next things and the lessons? Because you're involved in helping out other founders, and it's you've certainly given back to people in lots of different ways, and whether it's coming on a podcast like this and whatnot, you're always generous with sort of sharing. What are the things at the moment that are top of mind for you that you think are useful for others?
Yeah, I love working with other startups because I think, there's all sorts of like tiny little lessons that if I can help other people, navigate those situations more easily, or realize that they need to think about this thing, or maybe make one or two fewer mistakes than I did, then, that's great. So, I'm working with the Ministry of Awesome and their Founder Catalyst program. So that's great. And there's always, it's hard to know what lessons you have until the founder is talking about a problem or a situation. You're like,
yes.
Well, so that's great. But some of the overarching lessons, I guess, probably the two big things that stand out for me from my journey overall, if you zoom out to a real high level, is firstly, it's super hard. Like, it's the hardest thing you'll ever do, probably running creating a business. And there was this great quote from NVIDIA when someone said to him, so if you were to do it again, what would you do differently? And he's like, well, I wouldn't do it. And this guy's like worth billions. And he's like, I would not do it again. And I'm like, I'm maybe not that bad, but I mean, it is hard. And it's, if I'd known how hard it was, I wouldn't have done easy crypto. But by the time you get started, you're kind of, sunk cost fallacy. You're in there. Sometimes it's too hard to stop. But the flip side of that is, while it's incredibly hard, for me, the personal growth from that journey has been incredible. Like, I'm such a different person today than I was 8 years ago when we started Easy Crypto. And I love the opportunities that it's given me to grow and stretch and challenge and develop myself. And I never would have got opportunities like this working in corporate. I never would have developed, my public speaking skills or my leadership or my entrepreneurial streak, and grown as a person. So having had that opportunity to just, supercharge my personal growth has been invaluable.
Yeah, there's some great lessons in that, aren't there? And that, we don't necessarily know what our potential is until we get put in the situations where we have to stretch or sink or swim, however you want to put it. And then you find out, what you can do and what you need other people to come in and help with.
Yeah, and it's just constant stretching being in startup. It's also really good for imposter syndrome. Like, I talked about this a little bit at Startup Week, but one of the things that I found really good, because I've, had massive imposter syndrome. I mean, I tried to sell the business because I thought I couldn't run it. And so one of the things that I've sort of made a bit of a habit of, and I encourage other people to, if they struggle with this, is to when you do something, when you push yourself a little bit outside your comfort zone and then you succeed, or even if you only half succeed, take note of that and lock that in and bake that in as a win and go, okay, so I managed to do this thing that I wasn't sure that I could do. So next time, I can do a little bit more, and then look back on how far you've come. And, that's something I did a lot at Easy Crypto, sort of around when we were raising funds, and through the years after that, was looking back at who was I as a leader, as a founder 6 months ago, a year ago, where am I now, and just noticing how much I'd changed and grown. And that really helps, I think, for me at least, with mitigating those feelings of imposter syndrome, because I'm like, no, I actually did that thing. I achieved that. I've come this far. I've grown. I've changed. And it helped me a lot.
Yeah. So do you lean towards encouraging people to start something new, or to be cautious because it's so hard?
Jump in all the way, both feet. You never see, give it a try, and you'll never know unless you try, right? And better not to live life with regrets, right?
Yeah, fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Janine. It's been a real privilege to hear some of your story, and we'll look forward to chats in the future as you do new things and work with other people. And obviously it's going to be interesting just to see how Easy Crypto evolves under the new ownership with SwiftX too. So lots there to keep tracking on.
Cool. Thanks, Paul.
Thanks
for having me on.
Cheers.
The New Zealand Business Podcast, brought to you by Gorilla Technology, your strategic and proactive IT partner.